Hello, this is Tom Conwell, paranormal investigator and ufologist from Tri-City, New York Paranormal Society. I'm going to talk to you today about the scientific method. Pose a question: is it possible to hunt ghosts or to research ghosts in a truly scientific manner? I'm going to answer that later, but let's get into what the scientific method is, and then we'll do further discussion. This graphic pretty much shows what the scientific method includes, the steps that need to be taken. Ask a question, do background research, construct your hypothesis. You're going to test your hypothesis with an experiment, evaluate your procedure. If your procedure isn't working, you go back and you change the procedure. If it is working, you go on to analyze your data, draw your conclusions, which could mean one of three things. Results align with the hypothesis, and then you are able to communicate your results. Number two, the results align partially, and you may be able to communicate those, but chances are you can't, or not at all with the hypothesis, and you go back up and revisit your hypothesis. Overview of the scientific method. Purpose: what do you want to learn and prove? Well, today we're going to talk about ghosts and paranormal research. And I'm going to try to limit the scientific method to involving ourselves with ghosts and paranormal. Research. Conjecture. It's an opinion or conclusion based upon incomplete information. It's not what you want to do here. You want all the information, so you have to do good research. You have to create good experiments. Excuse me, that's later. You have to look at all the experiments that were done and compare them to where it is you want to go. Hypothesis. You have an if-then statement. The then portion is a prediction. From your hypothesis, you create an experiment. You write a test and evaluate. Then probably you'll have to rewrite the test and reevaluate. If not, multiple times. Analysis. You are going to be creating tons of data. You're going to have general ideas of where this data is going, and you may be able to draw a conclusion from it. Or you may have to go back and revisit your hypothesis and potentially even your research. Step 1. Purpose or question. To investigate whether it is feasible to write or record a procedure to prove certain aspects of ghost hunting. That's what we'd like to do. We would need to ask who, what, when, where, and why to absolutely everything. For instance, our generalized question may look like, are cold spots in haunted homes because of ghosts? That's what we may be curious about. Does EMF have a direct ghostly correlation, and when? And is it possible to reduce these to something measurable? You aren't going to perform a scientific method correctly if you cannot quantify your information. Step 2. Research. The research objective is you need to research what has been done before. Everything. You need to use all media available, which means magazines, books. You need to read every publication you can get your hands on. You need to visit web pages. You need to utilize what persons are likely to say on social media. Because there's a whole lot of really smart people out there who have been paranormal investigating for a long time and can add some information for you. Consult with others about what you would like to do, and above all, keep an open mind. And that's key. Your results may look like your experiments come after gaining knowledge, not before. You cannot create an experiment, you cannot go beyond the research point until you have gathered all the possible research that you can get your hands on. Does EMF have a directly ghostly correlation, and when? Does it? Let's look into it. Does a ghost spot mean a ghost? This may be some questions that get dragged up when you start doing your research. You're going to come across a lot of different things, and it's going to be tough to form a hypothesis from this. Once you have your hypothesis, you need to form some opinions. You need to learn everything possible about the subject. That's your research. Try to predict the answer to the question you're posing. An if-then is a prediction. This is necessary to pose the hypothesis, such as, if I experience a cold spot, then it is a ghost. It's an if-then statement. If my K2 meter lights, it is a ghost. If I see a shadow figure, it is a ghost. Presence of ghosts cause nausea or creepiness. These are some opinions in question form that you may be able to come up with for a hypothesis. We're going to get into why that is probably not a good idea later. Step 4, experiment. You must design a test, but there will be problems with everything you do. And the above was an understatement. Your test must be written so well that it is only necessary to hand it to someone to perform. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you want to do that because you want someone else's input. You need someone else's input. You need lots of someone else's inputs. This is by far the biggest trouble spot. Why? Because everybody wants to hold on to themselves. They want it for themselves. And they will not want to relinquish control. They just won't want to do it. I created a procedure, a methodology. That's the procedures on the left. And I also had to create a whole series of definitions, things to do before I got to the procedure. Let me go over them. On the right-hand column, a cold spot equals a 10-degree drop. I had to come up with some sort of a definition. That's my definition. We must monitor the heating and cooling system. In the Northeast especially, your heating system is on for 9 months out of the year, and your cooling system is on for 2. You've got to know what's coming out of there. Because if your procedure and methodology is of the question, if a ghost is present, the temperature will drop, you have to know why it's dropping. You must monitor the temperature outside. You must monitor the temperature at each window, each entry point. Those being windows, doors, floors, attic, and basement. Temperature and humidity inside and out, you've got to know what it is and how it's changing and how it affects the inside once it changes on the outside. Barometric pressure. You need to be recording that too. Now, if you're going to be able to, or if you want to determine whether temperature is dropping because a ghost is present, you're going to have to monitor yourself 360 degrees around where you're sitting. And you're going to need fast reactive measuring sensors. Because the temperatures may change very rapidly. You don't want an averaging sensor. Provide temperature and audio monitoring points for correlation of data. All temperature data recording must be done through data logging with time control. Now we're going to get into our procedure and you'll see some problems. Number 1, send all measuring equipment out for calibration and obtain certificates of calibration for all. The certificates of calibration should include measurement data. Because if you're going to take measurements, somebody's going to question you, how do you know this is working? A certificate of calibration may not be sufficient. You want to have the data from that certificate. You're going to want to know at what temperatures your sensors were checked. Track the temperature humidity swings of the room under test, inside or outside for a week, recording all changes. You're going to want to know when the temperature changes outside, what happens to the temperature inside, and how does that get affected? Whether the heat comes on or not, at what frequency it comes on. Place all measuring equipment at each measuring point, enter the room, and allow all measuring points to maintain equilibrium for 1 hour before initiating test. You open that door, you're going to get a blast of air from the outside. I don't know what the temperature is going to be, but it's going to be a blast of air. As you walk through the room, you're going to be creating eddy currents as you're walking through, and you're going to have temperatures changing all over the place. Perform tests while recording all points of interest, adding audio recording for correlating events. Why? Well, let's look at that. Use audio to comment on feeling of cold spots, which can then be correlated with temperature, because each audio entry should be accompanied with touching a sensor which will record a temperature spike with the audio entry. Now, why did I do this? The only reason I did this is because if you have a data logger that does not allow you to put audio commentary with the data logger, you're going to want to know at what point that you feel hot and cold. If you're on a paranormal investigation and you're with a partner in a room, the first thing that partner will say, do you feel cold? I feel cold all of a sudden. You're going to want to mark that. So how do you do that? You put one sensor that's dedicated to the person right next to them. The person saying, I feel cold. He reaches over and touches the sensor at the same time. That temperature sensor will spike up. The only thing that's used for. That will indicate that the person has felt cold at that point, and you can compare the data. That's if you don't have audio on your data loggers. Correlate all data. You need to put all the data together and look at it visually. And draw conclusions. There's really a number 8 here. And number 8 is, this is a terrible procedure. There's holes in measurement everywhere, and there's too much information left out. It looked like it was all inclusive, but there's too much going. That's why you need to give your procedure away. Give it to someone and get their input. Procedural cautions. Caution number 1, write a narrow hypothesis. The word narrow should be in quotes, italicized, and underlined. Narrow must be done. If you make a wide hypothesis, like, I'm going to prove ghosts with this test, well, it's never going to happen. You need to give it away. Give it all away. Get someone else to do it for you. And when they do it, they're going to come back to you with all kinds of errors. Errors that you probably won't notice. Number 3, you are going to fail. Absolute, ironclad guarantee you're going to fail. Number 4, you have to delete your protective mode. You can't be protecting this. Like I said, you must give it away, allow other people to do things, then you can compare it with what you're doing. That's fine. But it will indicate if there's any problems with what you're doing. Believe me, you'll see problems. Each topic has hundreds of possible hypotheses. Now, by topic, I mean something narrow like EMF. And maybe hundreds is not the right word, maybe thousands. Also, this is no place for ego. Check it at the door. Giving it away, that'll tell you if you have ego. Step 5, analysis. Analyzing your data. You need to take your data and print it out with all data points aligning. Now, that printout could take the shape of a bunch of data points, like 78 degrees, 78, 78, 78, 78.5, something like that. Well, that's a hard way to look at it. It would be better to do it graphically. Correlate and compare any changes found with items of note. You've got to account for everything. If one temperature sensor goes down or up and you haven't addressed it, well, then there's a hole missing. There's something missing in your analysis. Graph data so the results are visual. Data log everything. If they're visual, it'll stick out that there's some issue. Further analysis, changes will be obvious. If something changes, you'll see it. Study changes for easy comparison. Partial conclusion prior to completion. You might come up with a partial conclusion, but chances are your conclusion will be faulty and chances are you'll have to go back and visit research or hypothesis again. Is it necessary to reassess? Let's look. Here's our graphic again. Let's look down at the bottom where it says analyze data and draw conclusions. Results align partially or not at all with hypothesis. Well, that should trigger something to you. That should tell you something's wrong. So let's go over and back up to the big blue box. Experimental data becomes background research for the future. You may be able to use the results that you got to narrow your hypothesis and come up with a different test. You need to ask new questions, form new hypothesis, and experiment again. It may be so bad, your results, you may have to go back in and do background research and find out what you did wrong. And then do it all over again. Step 6, conclusion. What the data suggests. Review the data, that endless data. And it will be endless. You may be able to come up with some basic conclusions, like what is the data suggesting? You may be able, it may take you in a certain direction, but what you're looking for is proof. Is your conclusion proven by the data? If you say yes, I say, really? I don't think so. It won't be that easy. It's going to take you hundreds of tries, maybe more, to get this right. So, what will the data uphold? It's going to take hours to consider everything. You're going to have to check everything. You're going to have to account for everything. Are you ready to draw the conclusion? Are you ready? And proven is a really tough word. Is your conclusion proven? Not likely. Will the conclusion be upheld by everyone? Well, if you've given everything away, allow people that you don't even know to criticize, to give you input, then you're more likely to have a conclusion upheld. If you keep it to yourself, you're going to get roasted. That's not a good choice. When is this method not applicable? Well, let's look first when it works best. When you can isolate the phenomenon, it works. Good luck isolating paranormal phenomena. When you can account for everything, and I really do mean everything, it works. Can you do that in the paranormal field? When you can test after making controlled changes. Not likely you're going to be able to do that in the paranormal field, but maybe you can. Well, when it doesn't work is when nothing is under your control. There's nothing repeatable, or it contains too many variables. And where no values can be assigned. Like a sighting. You can put a number to that. And this is a whole lot of what the paranormal field is. No values can be assigned, and the values you get will be all over the map. So we're back to our question. Is it possible to hunt ghosts or to research ghosts in a truly scientific manner? My answer. Keeping science in the foreground is a very daunting task and is not for the faint of heart. I'm stopping one step short of stating that ghost research, proving that ghosts exist in a scientific manner, is impossible, but I'm not far from that conclusion. My conclusion. The answer. Exploring the unknown brings with it hundreds of unexplained phenomena and uncontrollable variables. These variables may include anything from the inclusion of different dimensions to an unholy amount of required instrumentation basically becoming unaffordable. This is an almost impossible task that cannot be completed until much more is known, in my opinion. And important here is, generally speaking, what may be the subject of an experiment that will hold up to the rigors of scientific method is well beyond the scope of most paranormal investigators. In my opinion, it is still beyond the scope of the science that we understand. Research into ghosts is a good and necessary thing to do, but scientific research via the scientific method is nearly impossible. And I'm going to repeat a point here. It's important to know that the rigors of the scientific method is well beyond the scope of most paranormal investigators. And I'm being nice by saying most. Think critically and narrow the scope greatly. Using the scientific method is possible now, if you narrow the scope. Patience is the name of this game. You can't prove it all with one test. You may likely need hundreds, maybe even thousands. You cannot use the scientific method in the presence of more than one variable. Everything needs to be under control, and some variables are just too large to consider. Portals to different dimensions. How do you consider that? How do you account for that? How do you measure it? EVPs are out of the air. Where do they come from? You may have a general idea, but you can't quantify it. What if you hear a voice walking down a hallway? Where did it come from? EMF spikes from unknown sources. You may be able to measure an EMF spike, but where does it come from? You have to account for that. Shadows that remain unexplained. These are sightings. Vibration detectors that trigger for unknown reasons. Cold spots from who knows where. And my favorite is psychic phenomenon. How do you quantify that? The scientific method is a very difficult process and not for the faint of heart. This has been Tom Conwell, paranormal investigator from Tri-City, New York Paranormal Society. Also ufologist. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with this movie, or you can try to contact us at Tri-City New York Paranormal Society.com, or you can find me on Facebook. Have a great day and hope you enjoyed the lecture.